I remember the smell of his workshop long before I remember his name. Pine shavings, lamp oil, damp wool hung to dry, and a grief that had learned to fold itself small and fit between the boards. You would have walked past his door twice and called him a quiet man, which is the way towns label a storm they cannot predict. He was more precise than quiet. He was Jonathan Toomey, a woodcarver who spoke in edges and curves. His tools were honest and his sentences few. The town called him Mr. Toomey when he was around, and that fellow when he was not. And they left him to his bench because that was what he seemed to want. Grief rearranges furniture no one else can see. It hides chairs you always sat on and puts a table where the doorway ought to be. Jonathan had learned to walk around invisible obstacles with practice that looked like stubbornness. He kept his back to the window. He sharpened blades that were already sharp. He carved with a care that bordered on defiance, as if proof well made could argue down a memory that refused to become smaller with time. Winter settled over the town and behaved itself, which is to say it was cold and fair and a little strict. The bells in the church were rapped for Advent but not yet rung in earnest. The baker practiced with cinnamon because he is a generous man, and cinnamon gives him courage. Children rehearsed at tripping over their own lines in the pageant. I made my rounds above the roofs and listened to small wishes reach up through chimney soot, and one of them snagged my sleeve. A boy hoping not for a thing, but for a likeness of a thing. A set of figures small enough for his hands, large enough for a table, holy enough to lead a heart on. His mother had kept the request in her pocket for weeks, turning it with her thumb as she measured days. They had come to town for a new start and found that new starts ask for companions. Where she had lived before, a nativity set had kept watch on the mantel. It was one of those family pieces that is more glue than wood by the time children stop moving it in and out of the hay. A figure had broken, then another, and then moving had broken the rest. The boy missed the way the stable made a small country on the mantel, with travelers who finally arrived and shepherds who knew where to look. His mother missed what he missed, and also something else, something she did not name. Grief recognizes grief. It does not always exchange names. She asked the seamstress. The seamstress pointed with a needle toward the lane that holds 3 cats and 1 roomer. If a thing can be carved, she said, he can carve it. If a thing can be returned to itself, he can do that too, but he will scowl first. She added, because women who sew see more than hems. Be patient with him. Be precise. They stood at his door on a day when snow decided to present itself in neat flakes instead of theater. The boy pressed his mitten into the wood and left a dark print that looked like a question. Jonathan opened as if a hinge had reminded him of its profession. His face was a map that had forgotten to label any towns. The mother asked if he would carve a nativity for Christmas. She asked as if speaking to a craftsman and a wound at the same time. He said he could. He set a price. He did not say welcome, but he did step aside, which is welcome's cousin. She spread a cloth on the bench to keep sawdust from swallowing her request. From her bag, she drew not a list, but a story told in details. The shepherd, she said, had a crooked hat because my father's hat always leaned in the wind. The angel's dress had a hem I sewed when I was small and proud of small stitches. Joseph stood as if he were both tired and relieved. The cow looked like she had heard secrets and agreed to keep them. A manger had a shade of honey in it, where someone spilled candle grease one year and never admitted it. And the child, she paused then, and the boy's mitten tightened on her sleeve. The child's smile was not painted on. It was carved, so it showed even in shadow. Could you? Would you? Jonathan listened with the intensity of a man taking a measurement he cannot mark with chalk. His tools waited. The lamp hummed. He nodded once. Come back in a week, he said, which means for a carver, come back when the wood tells me what it will not tolerate. They did not wait outside. They came each day, the boy who had learned to treat silence as a kind of glass you must not crack. stood on the threshold and watched. The mother, who had made peace with needles that prick and threads that knot, took a chair by the window and worked at her mending as if it were place-setting for a larger meal. On the first day, Jonathan chose wood. Not all pine is equal. Some carries songs, some carries tears, some carries the weather it grew in. He sorted boards by sound, tapping and listening for a promise. When he found a plank that answered softly and did not boast, he set it on the bench. He drew the stable first, because shelters come before stories. His blade moved, and curls of pale gold gathered like sleeping springs. The boy asked only one question: "Will the roof be low?" He wanted a roof a child could look under. Jonathan said, "Low," and made it so. On the second day, he took up the cow. He carved without hurry, finding the muscle in the haunch and the gentle stubbornness in the mouth. He was not copying. He was remembering what a good cow is like from the inside out. The mother watched the head take its tilt and said, "There she is." Jonathan did not answer, but something in his shoulders loosened one notch. The boy stroked the wooden ear with one finger and did not ask if he might. On the third day, the angel. Angels have terrified many a carver. Wings ask for confidence. Faces ask for mercy. He began at the hem and worked upward, choosing to let the figure be a visitor without a fright. The boy stood on his toes. "Will she be smiling?" he whispered, as if a loud voice might startle a feather. "Not yet," Jonathan said, and left the mouth until last. Not because it was difficult, but because it would tell the rest of the figure how to stand. On the fourth day, the shepherd. He gave the man a hat you could rely on, crooked just so. He gave him hands that had learned the weight of wool and the art of carrying news carefully. He carved a lamb tucked in the crook of an arm, faithful as breathing. The boy giggled once and then clapped his mitten over his mouth, embarrassed. "He laughs," the mother explained, "when something is exactly right." Jonathan's knife paused, then resumed with a new steadiness, as if he had been named and did not mind the name. On the fifth day, the donkey. Ears that are never quite symmetrical, a spine that admits work, eyes that know both stubbornness and gentleness without apology. He set the donkey beside the cow, and for the first time, the stable felt like a room instead of a plan. The mother took a breath that was almost a memory, and the boy reheated the stove with 2 sticks as solemnly as a deacon. On the 6th day, Joseph. Men who stand near wonder sometimes do not know what to do with their hands. Jonathan gave him hands that could hold a tool and cradle a question. He remembered how tired looks different when relief arrives, and he gave the stance that difference. He placed Joseph at the edge of the manger, not looking away and not presuming. Companion to a miracle. On the 7th day, Mary. Here, his knife slowed. You can give a figure a halo without carving a circle. He found the curve of back that comes from hours of watching a breathing bundle and checking whether breath continues. He set the tilt of head that is not submission, but fierce attention softened by love. He carved her cloak with folds that remembered travel and made peace with arrival. The mother's needle paused midair. The boy leaned forward until his scarf slipped and fell in a twist, and no one moved to pick it up. Then came the child, and time behaved. It did not stop, it deepened. Jonathan set a small block on the bench and looked at it as if it had asked him a personal question. He had carved children before, dolls, rocking horses, keepsakes tucked into trunks, but this was not likeness alone. He drew the knife and made 3 cuts that told the wood what it was about to become. He rounded cheek, parted lips, set the suggestion of a smile that was not painted and would show even in shadow. He carved the small fists every baby makes when the world is still too large for fingers to name. He softened the eyelids until they looked like they were considering light. He made the feet just wrong enough that anyone who has ever kissed a child's foot would recognize the urge. He stopped then, not because the carving was finished, but because something in him had sat down. He laid the knife on the bench and did not touch the wood, while he remembered a smaller room, a smaller cry, a smaller hand that had once clutched his finger and then not, and a door that had closed too early, and the sound a heart makes when it goes on anyway. He did not speak. He breathed the way men breathe when they are busy not drowning. The mother saw and did the bravest thing a visitor can do in a room like that. She did not fill the quiet with comfort that would not reach. She threaded her needle again and let the sound of thread against cloth keep company with the sound of a blade choosing its next work. The boy looked from the bench to the man to his mother and understood more than his years would let him say. Jonathan lifted the knife once more and, with a tenderness that could be mistaken for skill, finished the smile. They came back the next day to find the figures arranged on the bench in a clutter that started to look like order. The stable waited. The shavings on the floor looked like the sea. "There's one more," the boy said, shy as a secret. "A small red bird. Ours had one. It always sat on the stable roof." He spoke it quickly, as if asking for this last thing was a bigger thing than all the rest. Jonathan considered the request as if considering whether a red note belonged in a hymn. "A robin," he said quietly, and reached for a stub of cherry from the scrap box. He carved the bird so quickly you might have missed the miracle if you blinked. A tilt of head, a breast that holds winter without complaint, 2 feet ready to grip a bit of roof. He set it on the ridgepole, and the stable stopped looking like wood and began looking like welcome. The boy laughed his small laugh. The mother, to her own surprise, smiled so widely she had to put her mending down to make room for it. When all the figures were finished, Jonathan set them in the stable, one by one, and checked their distances with a care that was almost prayer. He stepped back and saw not his skill, but a circle of faces turned toward a center that did not belong to him. Then he did something he had not done in a long time. He went to the shelf where he kept stains and paints and oils and reached for a small jar he seldom opened. A thin wash of warmth for the manger, a glint on the angel's hair, less a shine than a whisper, the faintest blush for the child's lip. He was careful not to make what light could do better. They paid what he asked and then added, not out of pity, but out of fairness, 2 coins more. He frowned, then took them, because a man must let grace be as practical as any bill. The mother wrapped the figures in cloths that knew how to carry fragile things. The boy held the stable like a brother. At the door, he turned. "You can come," he said, as if inviting the carver to his own nativity. "If you want." Jonathan's mouth opened and closed. He nodded once, which is how a man says yes when he has forgotten the word. That evening, the town kept Christmas, the way towns do when they have decided to be better than last year. Lanterns along the lane. A confusion of good smells arguing cheerfully in the air. The church doors open wide enough to let in more than cold. In one small house, a mantle became a country again. The mother set Mary and Joseph and the child. The boy placed the shepherd and the lamb and decided after a long consideration where the donkey would be least offended. The robins sat where robins sit. They stepped back and their faces leaned toward the light. Jonathan stood in the doorway because a workshop teaches you to hover until you are invited. The boy turned, saw him there, and reached out his hand as naturally as if he had been reaching for him for weeks. Jonathan came in and stood in front of his own work, and for the first time since he had lost what he could not replace, allowed something made by his hands to comfort the hands that had made it. He put one finger to the stable roof and very gently set the robin a fraction more to the left. The boy nodded, expert to expert. The mother lit a candle, and the flame found faces that had been carved to hold it. Some miracles arrive like trumpets. This one arrived like careful work. A bench, a lamp, a blade. A request made with memory. a man who had been practicing absence, learning to practice presence again. He walked home under a sky that kept its stars modest and its cold honest. In the workshop, he put away his tools with the attention of someone saying thank you. He sat at the bench and looked at the wood left over and did not feel mocked by it. He reached for a scrap and, without plan, carved a small bird and set it on his windowsill. He did not name it Patience, but that is what it was. The town gave him a new name slowly, which is the only way to give a name that lasts. The quiet man remained quiet, but the sharp edges softened. Children learned to knock and wait because they were told to, and he learned to open before the second knock because he wanted to. Orders for toys arrived on paper smudged by eager hands. He took them. Now and then a figure would appear on his sill, left by no one, claimed by everyone. An extra sheep, a star, a bundle with a pretend loaf in it. He did not mind sharing authorship with a town that had decided to be his neighbor. I passed over his roof late that night and watched the lamplight write a warmer geometry on the snow. He had fallen asleep at the bench, which is a respectable place to sleep when the day has asked much and given more. I left a small parcel beside his tools, a new strop, a better oil, and a folded paper with a single sentence written in a hand he did not know but recognized. Some things are mended by carving, some by being carved. He would read it in the morning and tuck it into the lid of his tool chest and pretend it had always been there. If you ask what the miracle was, I will say it plainly. Not that a gruff man made something beautiful. He had been doing that. Not that a boy laughed and a mother smiled. They had been brave all along. The miracle was the return of proportion, of a heart learning how much room joy needs and how much room sorrow must be allowed, and discovering there was space for both. The miracle was a door that opened from the inside. The miracle was work becoming prayer and prayer becoming wood, and wood becoming comfort in a house that had needed it. If you are keeping a bench this year, keep it. Sharpen what you can. Take the measurements that love requires, not only the ones a ruler can supply. Be precise when a memory asks for it, and generous when a person does. If a visitor brings a story instead of a plan, learn the story by heart and cut to its rhythm. If you have a scrap of cherry, carve a small red bird and put it where someone can see it, and remember to ask for small brave things. And if a child invites you to stand in front of your own work and let it do what it was always supposed to do, go, stand, breathe. Let the light find the faces. It will. That is what light was made for, and what Christmas was given to us to practice.